Okay, you are live.
This is a meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District Board Legislative Committee, Friday, February 19th. Pursuant to Governor Newsom's Executive Order 2920 and the Alameda County Health Officer's current shelter-in-place order effective March 31st, 2020, the East Bay Regional Park District headquarters will now be open to the public, and the board, legislative committee, and staff will be participating in the meetings via phone video conferencing. Yuli, could you tell the public how they could participate?
Yes. So the best way to participate would probably be to just send me an email directly. So send an email to ypadmore, YPAD, as in dog, MORE, at ebparks.org. You can also go to our website. However, the easiest way to do that would be to send me an email.
Okay. That will go to the agenda. And we are going to reorder the agenda. We are going to skip for the moment the East Bay survey results. And we're going to state legislation. Is that correct? Someone? Eric?
Okay by me.
You're very agreeable, Doug.
Well, Doug, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Very, very light schedule, but don't be fooled. As you folks should know, or may well know, today is actually the deadline to submit and introduce legislation. So over the course of the last 3 days, I've probably been reviewing upwards of about 800 to 1,000 bills. So your package is going to get on the state side. It's probably going to get a little bit more robust, but let's start with item 1, and that is AB 72 by Assembly Member P.T. Norris down in Laguna Beach. And this appears to be a bill that is sort of in the spirit of what is it called? What, cutting the green tape, Eric? It seems like to a significant degree, and you folks should be aware of that term, in as much as we used it frequently during our virtual visits a couple of weeks ago. But in this instance, the bill is seeking to sort of coordinate and integrate permitting of climate adaptation projects. And it's asking the Secretary of the California Natural Resources Agency, in working with his staff, to try to put together some key goals, objectives, steps in moving toward, again, a more streamlined process around the permitting of these types of projects, more a one-stop shop type of approach. So I believe that we're looking for support out of the legislative committee, Madam Chair, and others. Anything else that needs to be added, Eric, on this topic, or Lisa?
I think you're right. I think it is in the spirit of cutting the green tape. And I think the only thing that I would say is we just want to make sure that coastal adaptation includes the Bay, which I think my interpretation is that it does, Bay and Delta.
Okay.
But and then also in terms of support recommendation, we want to do that all at the end, so that we don't have to do the roll call too many times.
Efficiency.
Very much, very well. Proceeding on then, AB 391. This is a bill by Assembly Member Bella Padua, and I have not had the opportunity to meet this person quite yet, but bill seeks to augment $5 million through the general fund to establish a pollinator program. And it would be operated, administered through the Department of Food and Ag, working in cooperation with UC Extension, Resource Conservation Districts, the U.S. Food and Ag agency as well. And it appears in the reading of the bill that it's really trying to focus on working on landowners on the natural and working lands in particular, and facilitating more pollinator projects in those areas. So questions, Eric, Lisa, further comments?
Just, I think what the aim of the author is to encourage agricultural, workers and ranchers and owners of agricultural property to promote pollinator habitat as well. So there's a very specific working lands provision. So I think it's encouraging, he's from Stockton, so I think it's encouraging people in the Central Valley to create more habitat for bees and
Would we also be able to use it?
I believe so. I don't know if Doug mentioned these bills were kind of early on, and they will get developed further. So it's not super specific on what all entities qualify, but as it's written now, I would think that we would.
There might be an opportunity at Ardenwood, depending on what happens with the agricultural property.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've been real interested in bees and the problems they've been having, so might be good. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay.
Then if no other questions, then moving on, ACR 17 would proclaim the week of May 16th through the 22nd to be Special Districts Week. I don't know if I have much more to add.
I started to say, what are we going to do? All
and
right.
this would be only for 2021.
Okay.
So I think in the spirit of solidarity and working with CSDA, we're going to be looking for support on that.
Sure.
So, and then lastly, on SB 347, this would create the California Tree Fund. And essentially, as I'm reading it, reviewing it, it would entail creating a new tax checkoff box on your tax forms, voluntary contributions toward a new fund, where the funds, ultimately the proceeds would be bifurcated in such a way that some of the funds could be applied toward what's called the urban forestry program. And then the remainder of the proceeds would then be allocated to the urban greening program or the green infrastructure programs, of which is identified in your summary right in front of you, that the district had recently received a $1.4 million Transformative Climate Communities grant. I probably should have done some of my research. I wouldn't get too excited about this piece of legislation. It seems to me that I can't even recall which of the check boxes perform the best, but it's pretty meager in terms of what they generate on an annualized basis, somewhere in the order of maybe $1 million to $2 million. I could be wrong, but that's my recollection. So.
Yeah, I think that's right, Doug. They don't typically generate that much income. The one thing that's exciting about that grant was the Transformative Communities. That is a partnership arrangement. And so we were actually able to partner with Oakland and the San Leandro Creek folks to qualify for that. So that was from a grant standpoint, that was a big win for us.
Were you the lead agency?
I don't believe we were the lead. I don't know, maybe Lisa knows. I think it was Oakland was the lead.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Okay. Any questions, anyone? How about a motion to support?
All right, I would move that we support the consent calendar items of state-supported legislation.
We'll be glad to second the motion. Any discussion? Yuli, would you like to call the roll? There she is.
Here I am. All right, we'll start with Director Waspy.
Aye.
And it looks like, I think we're waiting for Director Rosario to join. We'll just move forward with Director Wieskamp. Should I?
Aye.
Looks like it's unanimous.
The
And
W.
you could probably, can you leave the roll open?
Yes, we
Yes.
can do that.
Well, we wouldn't normally do that. So I would just go ahead and let the minutes reflect that Dee was not here and that it was too
Absolutely.
advancing.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sure he would support it if he was.
Yes.
Okay, moving on.
So because Dee's not here yet, maybe we can move on to the other state matters.
Go for it.
And our first presentation, so sorry you were unable to join us, Anne, but a number of the board members and Doug, Lisa, and I, and AGM Kelchner did virtual visits over 2 days in January with our delegation in Sacramento. And it actually, I felt like it went pretty well for being virtual.
Okay.
And so what we wanted to Yuli participated with us as well, and she took notes at the meetings, and we wanted to provide hopefully a relatively brief recap of some of the things that we discussed and the actions that we are taking to follow up. So Yuli, if you would like to go ahead and share your screen and your presentation.
Yes. Sorry for the technical issues I'm having today.
It's Friday.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure it's just the slide there. Is that right? Okay, there we go. So hello, everyone. As you know, I am Yuli Padmore. I'm acting legislative assistant, and today I'm presenting the recap and key takeaways from our virtual Sacramento meetings on January 25th and 27th. Little animation. So these Sacramento meetings were held with various state senators and assembly members. District attendees, as Eric kind of mentioned earlier, included our board members, AGM of Acquisition, Stewardship and Development, Christina Kelchner, Chief of Government Affairs and Legislative Affairs, Eric Feeler, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst, Lisa Baldinger, our Sacramento advocate, Doug Houston, and myself. And I want to give a special thank you to Fallon, Laura, Amy for their help organizing this effort. So in each meeting, we discussed key issues and state legislative priorities that include wildfire, climate bond, COVID-19 funding and response, advocating for jobs and building infrastructure for an East Bay, California Conservation Corps crew, and the Cutting the Green Tape Initiative, which Doug just mentioned a while ago, which improves interagency coordination and allows ecological restoration and stewardship to occur more quickly, simply, and cost effectively. The Park District has sent out thank you letters reiterating these priorities to all of the state members that we met with on the 25th and 27th. So our first meeting on the 25th was with Senator Bill Dodd, Democrat from District 3 in Napa, California. In that meeting, items that were brought to our attention were the recommendation of unmanned aircraft systems, otherwise known as drones, for Forest Service use, A very interesting recommendation, of course, and the Park District will look into that. It was also recommended we look into the senator's recently introduced legislation to ease challenges for insurance issuance. So Senator Dodd agreed to communicate with California Department of Finance to ask how special park districts can receive COVID-19 relief funding. As a follow-up, the district offered to support on communication to achieve that effort regarding the COVID-19 relief effort. And you're probably going to see this throughout the slide. This was one of the prominent things that everyone could support. So next we met with Assemblymember Timothy Grayson, Democrat from District 14 in Concord, California. Assemblymember Grayson agreed to communicate with the Department of Finance to ask how to locate COVID-19 relief funding. He supports advancing permitting issues, that would be cutting the green tape, and our efforts towards building a base for California Conservation Corps crews in the East Bay. Item follow-up for the district. The district has offered to support in communications and COVID-19 relief funding, and we will coordinate a walk and talk with Director Coffey in the spring or summer of this year. And the recommended location was Bay Point Regional Shoreline.
Yuli, on that meeting, we also, on the Conservation Corps, we also did touch on Concord and the Concord Hills area that might be a good location for the Conservation Corps, and it's in his district. So there was some discussion about that.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Okay, here we go. Sorry, a little trouble moving the slide forward or advancing the slide, sorry. So the following meeting was with Senator Bob Wieckowski, District 10 Democrat of Fremont, California. The senator and his office will inquire with the Environmental Protection Agency and Budget Committee about locating climate bond resources. Senator Wieckowski agreed to meet with California Conservation Corps' Executive Director, Bruce Sato, to discuss opportunities for Conservation Corps infrastructure in the East Bay. That happened on the Friday after our meeting, so it's likely occurred by now, and we'll be talking to them more about that. The senator's office agreed to research resource allocation for Coastal Conservancy through the Budget Committee, and will communicate with California Department of Finance to ask how to receive COVID-19 relief funding. We also received support for advancing permitting issues, and the district will follow up. The district's follow-up is to provide support on communications for COVID-19 relief funding, and we'll keep their office updated on the status of N3 Ranch and Tesla properties.
Really, on the Coastal Conservancy funding, just for the board's interest, there was recently our ask was $100 million for the Bay program of the Coastal Conservancy in a climate resources bond. And recently, Bill and Doug may get to this a little later, that was introduced on the Assembly side that included only $10 million for the Bay program. So we have a fair bit of work to do on that front, but it was good that Senator Wieckowski was interested in looking into it for us.
The Park District met with Senator Nancy Skinner's staff, Legislative Director Katarina Robinson, and Senate Fellow Symphony Barbie, who agreed to support the Park District with identifying a contact at California Department of Finance to ask how the district can receive COVID-19 relief funding. We'll keep saying this over and over again if we have to, right? No. Senator Skinner's team also supported advancing permitting issues, again, cutting the green tape. District follow-up is to provide support on communications for COVID-19 relief funding. And And yeah, and we want to thank her staff for meeting with us. They were very, very helpful. So as were all the other staff members that we met with as well. Then on January 27th, we met with Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, District 16 Democrat of San Ramon, California, who agreed to support us in identifying a contact to ask how to receive COVID-19 relief funding. The Assembly members team also agreed to advance stewardship projects such as McCosker Creek restoration. The Park District follow-up includes supporting communications for COVID-19 funding, assisting with advancing projects like McCosker, and keeping their office updated on the status of N3 Ranch and Tesla properties. And so that was something that was pretty, I think it was a pretty good discussion. So I don't know if you want to add anything on that, Eric, or not, but.
Just that the Assembly member is a big fan of the Park District, and she had the most, in many ways, had the most detailed responses to our asks. So I think we're going to continue to have a great relationship with that office.
Assembly Member Rob Bonta, District 18, Democrat of Alameda, California, supports helping the district find a contact for COVID-19 funding and supports cutting the green tape initiative. This is another item where we're very happy to help with support on communications. Assembly Member Alex Lee, we met with, the 25-year-old who was recently elected and is new to the Capitol. Democrat Lee represents California State Assembly District 25 of Milpitas, and his office is doing a very good job so far. And they're enthusiastic park users. They expressed appreciation for the Park District, and the district also, we expressed our appreciation for their support with advancing stewardship permitting projects. Assemblymember Bill Quirk, District 20, Democrat of Hayward, California, offered to support us in identifying a contact to ask how to receive COVID-19 relief funding. He also offered support to advance stewardship projects such as Hayward Marsh. Again, we will support communications for COVID-19 relief and will assist with advancing projects like Hayward Marsh. I know this is, as you can see, we have Director Dennis Waspy in the photo here. I don't know if he has any comments or anything he wants to say here, but I can kind of leave that open if you wanted to add anything. Director Waspy.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I consider Bill, you know, he is my Assembly member. He's always supportive of the Park District. He loves the Park District. I think he has, well, I can't judge it, but I know he's having a very, very good time when it comes to the town hall, district town halls that he has out in Coyote Hills. He loves that and he misses it and he wants to do it some more. He's an interesting scientist. Whenever I talk to him about stuff, he goes, let's write some legislation right away. And he just seems to be a guy that's still very active and very supportive of the Park District. And I think he's a great asset to us.
Agreed. Our last meeting was with Democratic Senator Steve Glazer of District 7 in Orinda, California. The senator supports identifying a contact to ask how to receive COVID-19 relief funding and offers support to advance any permitting issues. And the Park District, again, will follow up on our offer to support their office with communications on COVID-19 relief funding. And that covers our 2021 Sacramento meetings. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions or comments, we're happy to talk about it.
Thank you, Yuli.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions or comments or additions? Looks like you had very successful virtual meetings, so that's good.
I think Dennis has a comment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to say I congratulate the staff for being so proactive and doing this kind of stuff. And I'm in a shutdown mode, but you guys just keep going at it and keep advocating for us. And I didn't think it was going to be that successful. I hate Zoom meetings, but I think, well, obviously they won't get into the psychology of politicians and why they become politicians, but it's wonder they want to be around people. They want to give you things and they want you to engage them. So this was an excellent idea. I mean, I think they were all very responsive. The 4 assembly members and one senator that I visited just seemed to be very, very thankful that we're there. And I think we have really, really good funds, not the word I want to use, but valuable stuff. I mean, when we're talking about wildfire, climate resiliency, getting youth to work in our EDCC programs, this is right in there. I mean, you can hit a home run with that. You pitch that to an assembly member and you're just hitting home runs all the time. Those are wonderful, great subjects that need attention. And I think what's to lose by supporting the Park District on something like that? It's all their gain. And I'm glad you guys are tapping into that.
Agreed. I'm also really grateful for the experience this year. It was my first Sacramento trip. And so Eric and Lisa were just super helpful. It was really great to see them in action and what happens at these meetings and everything that the board members do, all of the work that you all put in. I know you sit on the chair and they see you live on meetings, but you're actually out there, you're working for the district. So I appreciate that and just want to vocalize that.
Well, I think you did very well with your virtual meetings. I recently talked to Celeste Garamandi and Nancy Rodriguez, and so obviously I think there's going to be a continuing push on Tesla, and it may be a long haul, but I told Celeste if there's anybody who can persist, it's she. But I am interested, and I think the district is too. And I know the newer board members were asked to sign on to support, and they all did. So that's good. Anything further on this?
I just wanted to say, reiterate Yuli's acknowledgement of Fallon, Amy, and Laura. They did a really great job of coordinating this and frankly, giving people time to have a break in between meetings.
That's a good idea.
One of the most important things.
Be considerate of each other. Okay, well, good job. All right, hopefully I can do the next one. Okay, what do we need to do next? Has D arrived yet or not?
Does not appear to have.
We have no D. Shall we go on to federal then?
Yeah, no, we've got a couple other state issues. If
Okay.
you don't,
I see that.
The next one on the agenda is our situation with the compromised trees or tree die-off. We just didn't want to put die-off in writing per se.
Okay.
And I think interim general manager Victor may want to speak to this too, but it's clear that this is not just a East Bay Parks issue, that this is going to be a regional, if not statewide issue. Had we had more information on it, it probably would have been on our list to talk to our legislators about back in January. More recently, Chief Hiley, myself, and Lisa and Doug met with Tom Porter, who is the head of CAL FIRE, and he had not been made aware of this situation yet, and I think was very alarmed, maybe too alarming of a word, but he was clearly impacted him. And so we're going to continue conversation with CAL FIRE about the magnitude of the issue. I think Eileen mentioned that just Anthony Chabot alone would cost $30 to $40 million to eradicate those compromised trees. So this is something that we're going to need to work on in the state budget, and with Doug's help, hopefully we can get some assistance. It's very impactful. I haven't really ventured to a lot of our parks this this year. I just stayed mostly to the ones close by, but I did go to Chabot to look at the trees, and I couldn't believe it. So I think it's going to be an emerging topic the rest of probably for the next 20 years, frankly, but at least certainly the rest of this legislative session. One thing that did come out of our conversation with the chief is that they do have curtain burners available, so that if we think it's a pathogen, but we don't really know for sure, but it may be something that we don't want spreading. So it may be the type of thing that we have to not only remove the trees, but also dispose of them on site. And so a curtain burner is one way to do that. And we may be able to loan some of those from CAL FIRE. And CAL FIRE also mentioned that there is a hazard mitigation grant program. So there may be some opportunities for grant funding as well. But we kind of wanted to introduce the topic to you all, because we know it is going to be something that Sacramento is going to have a great deal of impact on, and even potentially the United States Forest Service. So I don't know, Doug or Lisa or Carol, if you all have any additional thoughts that you might want to share at this point.
I just want to, the committee is aware of how we're approaching this within the Park District. You know, we're very lucky with the talents of our new assistant fire chief who came from CAL FIRE. And so what we have done is we've mapped the die-off within our parks. And it's quite, I want to say it's 1,000 acres, but I'm not sure that number is accurate. So take it with a grain of salt. But it's, they have mapped it, and then they're targeting it for prioritization as to where's the highest risk, where are the biggest assets, and where's the biggest life property damage risk, and we would target those areas for removal first. But it's going to be a multi-year, a decade effort or more to eradicate all of these trees. We have an interdisciplinary team in the Park District, and then they are also working with teams with USDA and some of our other outside stakeholders. So I think this is going to be a huge regional concern. It's very sobering. It reminds me of the bark beetle die-off in Southern California that killed the San Bernardino National Forest. And if you drive along 580 and just look up and you see those brown spots, that's what we're talking about. And so it's very serious. We are looking at it. We are applying the best science that we can to solve the problem. And then we'll use the best fire science and forest management to address it as well.
Okay, anyone else have any comments or questions? Dennis?
Yeah, Carol, I was wondering, so when the assistant chief did his survey, what we refer to 1,000 acres, is that mostly in Anthony Chabot? Or
no, that's
eucalyptus all the way up to Richmond, but where is it concentrated, or is it concentrated? Is it widespread?
So, well, there's this, I think what the most significant area is in Anthony Chabot, but it's throughout all our Ridgeline parks, and it's also at the Shoreline Park, surprisingly enough. I was driving in Albany, and I looked up at the hills there, and you can see spots of eucalyptus die-off. And then Eric is saying it's been as far south as San Diego, and we know that Marin is confronting this as well. And in terms of causation, they think it's a combination of drought and climate change and a fungus.
Trifecta.
It is very, very, it's different than just my neighbors complaining about the 10 Hills Trail, or not complaining, but having concerns about the 10 Hills Trail, because I look into that Anthony Chabot every day, and it's incredible. They're very dead. You can't say they're not dead, or maybe you can, maybe they'll come back. But the point is, it's very, very visual, much more visual of a threat of fire than anything we've ever in my opinion, seen around. It's going to be a real big deal. And I hope if we better get our public affairs folks churning pretty fast.
And our legislative team is putting together what I'll call a toolkit, so that to very easily communicate the scope and significance of the problem to all the groups that we need to. And this is going to have to be at the federal and state level. And we're going to need FEMA. We're going to need FEMA monies and climate change monies. And it's just going to take a multi-jurisdictional significant investment to address it.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there
Okay.
any treatment or any potential treatment for this pathogen, or are we investigating that as somebody at some level?
The USDA is looking into it, and right now the concern is that if it is a pathogen, that we not do something that would spread it. So
I'm thinking of something that might keep it from spreading would be a
yeah,
good thing.
so I think I don't think the science is back on what's causing it, but that's what their best guess is. It's an opportunistic pathogen that is taking advantage of stress trees.
Oh my goodness. Okay. If it's not one problem, it's 10 others, huh? Okay. Well, I think we've done that one.
And I think Dee has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm late.
There he
there-
is.
Hi.
Welcome, Dee.
Is there any kind of regional cooperation or collaboration to deal with the pathogen?
Yeah, Lisa and I have been talking amongst the Together Bay Area folks and also our colleagues that do government affairs in some of the other agencies, so Mid-Penn and Marin. And it's, I think it's going to be a cross-divisional effort in every agency. So it's going to take not just public affairs and government affairs and fire department, but it's going to impact everybody.
I think we're going to need to have, I think we're trying to get a better handle on the science and the scope of the problem. But I anticipate we're going to have to sponsor, along with other agencies, some community meetings starting in the late spring through summer, and start to educate people about this and bring people's attention to the scope of the problem. And we really have, it's really, I mean, it's a formidable challenge taking down that many trees, even if we had the money, but the money is a big obstacle.
Well, and disposing of it is not going to be cheap either.
Exactly.
It has to
I
be.
may share, I spoke with Mid-Peninsula Open Space staff yesterday, and their stewardship team shared they are not seeing as large of an impact on their land. They've seen some on coyote brush, but their thought behind that was it speaks more to support the idea this may be a pathogen, which has the potential for spreading. And for that reason, removing the affected vegetation on our land and doing so safely sooner than later would help their land not have as significant impacts as the East Bay is seeing. So they are willing to come with us and support us in any way to ensure that it doesn't spread to their land as far as it has in the East Bay Hills.
Makes sense.
And just the topography in some of these areas poses its own challenges as well. It's a very serious, big challenge that we will be facing, but we're not, we don't have our heads in the sand. We've got a team and we're talking to the right folks so we can come up with a multi-jurisdictional response to it.
Okay.
I think before you join, just real quickly, that we did, with Doug's help, we did have a meeting with the head of CAL FIRE, Tom Porter, raised this issue, and it was, I believe, the first time he'd heard of it. So it's now on their level, at the highest level on their radar, and we'll continue to have conversations with them.
And I know Eric used the word alarm, and probably that was an exaggeration, but generally speaking, Chief Porter's pretty straight faced, and I did see his eyebrow raise when we did mention the topic. And I seem to recall that he's assigned at least 1 or 2 people that were on the phone call. And by the way, during the course of the phone call, we had, I think there was 7 or 8 representatives, both from CAL FIRE and OES on the call. And to a person, they've been alerted. And I don't know if we've had any follow-up, Lisa. There was a gentleman, I think, was it Helgi, that he had identified that seemed to have some background in pathogens. So I don't know what our next steps are, but it was very favorably received. Is not the right word. It was received. Note taken, and hopefully that they're going to be working with us in the very near future to find resolution to this sooner than later.
Okay. Anything further?
Dennis has his hand up, Ann.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you guys are really advocating for this and signing or sounding the alert, because I was at least a month and a half ago, I was playing golf at Redwood Canyon Golf Course, and I saw my friend from East Bay Mud, Mark Silva, come in. He's the head of the Ranger Department or something, and he was followed by 2 CAL FIRE vehicles. And I met these guys, and I've got their business card, but not on me right now. But they were pathologists that were here to study that. Mark brought them down and said, "Hey, have you noticed this? Have you seen this?" And I said, this would be a big deal come summertime. And what do you guys have a plan or anything? And they said, the pathologist literally said, "We're going to wait around till spring to see if they make a comeback, if they can recover." He thought it was drought related, and that if they sprout and come back in spring, everything will be good. But boy, that timeliness,
That's optimism.
the urgency didn't seem to be there at that time. But I'm glad we're mentioning that urgency, because if it does get to be summer and a lot more start dying off, it's going to be a really lousy deal. So thanks for all you're doing.
Considering the lack of rain, I'm not sure there's a chance of comeback on any level, but whatever. Anyone else? I can't see. Okay. Next item is the nuisance abatement legislation update.
Hoping our guests can sit through these 2 items, so, now that Dee's here. But this shouldn't take too much time. But the good news is we have a bill number. We actually have a bill, AB 959. So Kevin Mullen was able to introduce the bill. MidPenn had been working with his office to be the author. So now we have work to do in the East Bay to get our delegation lined up to support, which we are in the process of doing. But it's really exciting to see a bill that was the idea of, I think, Carol and Jason Rosenberg. So it's really it's cool to see something moving forward that we sort of instigated. So I don't know if Carol, you or Lisa or Doug, if you want to elaborate any more on it. We've kind of done an overview at the last meeting, so I don't know if we need to go through the whole issue again.
Yeah. I'm just really excited we have an author, and Eric and Lisa put a really, along with Mid-Peninsula, put a really nice fact sheet together to educate legislators on the issue and why it was needed. And I thought they made a very concise, compelling point. And this will be really helpful for us in addressing our encroachments.
Okay. Cool. All right. Anything further? And wildfire training center update.
This is another issue that was brought to us by, well, it's an issue that was brought to us by Senator Glazer, and it's another one where they wanted our input in the beginning. They are looking to develop a training center that would primarily focus on training formerly incarcerated individuals and giving them tools to fight fires. I think primarily wildfires, but there's also some hope that perhaps they could eventually qualify for municipal fire departments. A bill was introduced. It does not mention East Bay Parks. And it doesn't really talk about the training center and the scope of it and how elaborate they're thinking it would look. There is a center in Ventura that they previously had modeled this after, but there's some questions about how effective that center's been. And I think Senator Glazer's office is open to input and suggestions from the Park District. So we're just continuing to have the conversation with him about it. If it's a full-on training center like the one that's off of 880, kind of down by the Coliseum, that's probably not an appropriate compatible use for Park District property. But if it was something that would be advantageous to our fire team and to the district, we would look at it closely. And Chief Tiley's been very involved in these conversations as well. So we're kind of following her lead in many ways. So, but we just wanted to make sure that everybody kind of had the latest update that there is actually a bill introduced, and we're continuing to have the conversation. And I don't know, Lisa, if you and Doug want to add anything to that.
Lisa?
Well, no, really quick, I think the challenge is trying to find the intersect between what it is that the senator is looking for and how we can accommodate that while also meeting some of the district's needs as well. And that is to maybe station some more CCC crews within the East Bay. There's some fundamental incongruities that we need to sort of work through in this legislation to try to put together a marriage between what the senator is proposing and what we would ultimately like to see as well. Is that a fair assessment, Eric?
Yeah, I think so. I think it doesn't hurt to continue to have the conversation, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and energy from Senator Glazer's staff. So even if ultimately the intent of the author isn't something that is compatible with the Park District property, we're creating a good relationship with the staff, and I think that'll be important for other things as well.
Yeah, good comment.
Questions or comments? Okay. Any other matters? Or are we ready to go see the service?
I think we're probably ready to go, but Doug, did you want to briefly at all touch on?
No, just really briefly, Eric mentioned earlier that there has been an assembly companion bill to SB 45, a climate bond that was introduced on the Senate side. I haven't seen a bill number for the assembly vehicle yet. It should be introduced any time. And we've seen advanced copy of the legislation. I'm going to do my best over the weekend, maybe Monday, to sort of do a compare contrast between the two versions so that the district is fully apprised of what's contained in both and what are the benefits of one versus the other. And ultimately, I mean, the goal is, as Eric had mentioned, among other things, is we're hoping and working through our coalition down in the Bay Area to try to secure $100 million for the Bay program. So that's sort of our ultimate mission.
Okay. Good. Anything else? And let's take a look at the East Bay survey.
So we, I don't know if anybody can remember pre-COVID times, but pre-COVID, we had a board workshop where we were directed to explore revenue possibilities for the district. And so then COVID hit, and we spent a lot of time doing surveys on COVID and the impacts and how people were perceiving parks during this time. But having done those surveys and now moving into the new year, we did commission a survey at the end of January at the end of December that looked a little more closely at revenue possibilities. And we commissioned Lake Research Partners, who have joined us here today, David Merriman and Jacqueline Juten. We would like to turn it over to them to do the presentation, but would also like to give Lisa Baldinger an opportunity to maybe comment a little bit about some of the methodologies that she's seen in working with David and Jacqueline and our other public engagement projects.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. So as our board likely remembers, in 2020, we did a scientific survey with Lake Research Partners, building off of our 2019 Large Reaching Community Survey. That survey was a non-voter survey that was weighted to the East Bay demographics. And building off the success of that with Jacqueline and David, this January, we did a voter survey of East Bay residents in English and Spanish. And so they'll share a little bit about their methodology, but we're really excited to work with them on this survey, which was targeted to East Bay voters for both the June and November upcoming elections. So with that, David.
Great, thank you, Lisa and Eric, and it's been a pleasure working with you. And as a longtime East Bay resident and a frequent visitor to East Bay Parks, it's a thrill to be working on these important issues with all of you. And Jacqueline and I, along with our team here at Lake Research Partners, conducted, as noted, this new survey, which is directed at voters, which is a subset of the, so we were looking at the whole population in the East Bay last year when we did the community survey, and of course that was produced and publicly, and we were excited to see the positive reaction to that among all of the constituents of the parks. But this is more strategic in the sense of looking at the question of what do the voters who are likely to turn out and vote in the next election think of the district, and how would they respond to potentially a new revenue measure if that were placed on the ballot. So Jacqueline will put up on the screen here, and I'll talk about sort of overview of our findings and walk through those. Jacqueline will give some of the specific numbers on the overall attitudes toward the district, and then I'll come back at the end and talk about the communication and messaging that might occur around a revenue measure if that were to go forward. As noted, we're just getting the display set up there, but we designed this to look at two electorates because we wanted to see if it might make a difference whether a measure was on the ballot in June when we have the state and local primaries, or in November of 22, which is obviously a general election, which has a somewhat larger electorate. So a lot of people turn out and vote in November that don't always vote in those primaries in June. So we stratified our sample, designed it so that it was, we were able to look at both elections. So it was overall 600 likely voters across the two counties in the East Bay. And Jacqueline, we're still seeing the notes version of this. I don't know if it's possible to switch that on the screen. So we're seeing the whole slide, but it's 600 likely voters. So that's, robust sample to understand the full electorate that's likely to turn out in November. And then within that, a subset of 400 likely voters who we expect to turn out and vote in June of 22. And of course, all of those voters we also expect to turn out in November. Primary voters are also general election voters usually.
David, sorry, this is Yuli. I'm going to ask, I think Fallon might be able to pop it up, pop up the presentation on screen so that we're not looking at in this format. Would that be helpful for you all?
I don't know, Jacqueline, do we have it up?
I'm sorry. Yeah, is it not showing correctly?
No,
it's showing in presenter view
instead of one.
Is that better?
No.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, maybe if
Sure.
Fallon could, that would be.
Yeah,
If
could
you
you
put the icon at the bottom that looks like a little television screen on a stand, that should do it.
Yeah, that should flip it.
It's right next to your.
I see. Yeah.
Well, it's giving us a blank screen.
Yeah, that didn't do it.
You can fill in whatever numbers you like.
So Jacqueline, if you could just stop sharing for a moment, and then
Sure.
we'll Fallon to pop up the presentation for you. And you're on slide number.
Sorry.
Is that correct?
Sorry about that.
Don't worry about that. It's fine. Fallon?
setting up here. One moment.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so I'll continue on and we should have that up on the screen. There we go. All right, so just want to flip up to
Fine.
slide 2. And we're talking about the methodology.
What a
There we
crowd.
go.
What a concept.
Here we go. So sorry for any technical delay here. So the design was basically to look at those two different electorates, and they're embedded in each other so we could efficiently get a representative sample to look at either one. And of course, there's a full set of crosstabs and all of the different subgroups within the electorate that we're able to reference and analyze as well with this sample design. We're mostly going to focus here on the sort of overall top line findings, and in particular how people obviously view the park district as well as the potential to support a revenue. So I'm still seeing slide 9. I don't know if it's possible to flip up to slide 2. Here we go. Okay, so that's the design and the electorate, and it's stratified and weighted to make sure that we're looking at a accurate picture of the likely electorate. So on the next slide, you'll see the demographics, and this is for the November voters overall in the East Bay, and compared to the general population, voters are older. They tend to be somewhat more educated. Still quite diverse. This is a diverse community, but not quite as diverse by race and ethnicity as the overall population. And then you see some of the other breakdowns in terms that we looked at demographically in terms of their family status, ideology, homeowners, renters, and so on. Obviously, it's a mostly Democratic in terms of politics, and that's relevant when you're talking about ballot measures and who might vote for something that would be part of the understanding of the electorate if we were to move forward. So from here, let me give you just an overall summary of the findings. Again, Jacqueline will cover some of the numbers when we get to those, and then I'll wrap up with the messaging. So on the next slide, you'll see the key findings that consistent with the community surveys, when we just look at voters, they're highly aware of the East Bay parks. They are supportive of the parks. They are frequent visitors, and they rate their experience with the parks and staff very highly. We have over half of the voters saying they visit the parks at least once a month. About a third of them say they are visiting weekly or more often. They rate their experience with the district very positively, 91% giving a positive rating to their experience with the regional parks, and just a handful saying it's just fair or poor. And residents are receiving information about the parks from friends or family or directly from the Park District website and there's a range of other sources, but those are the most common. And most people do have at least some source of information. They're not, only 19% say they're not getting any information about the Regional Park District. So then from there, on the next slide, you'll see the findings in terms of the funding. We did find that most voters are open to supporting increased funding for the Park District. The total was 72% who say, in principle, I would support a measure to increase funding for the district. 46% say they would strongly support that. And those are good numbers. They're solid. They certainly suggest an openness and a willingness to support this, as of course voters have in the past. We found essentially no difference between the primary and general electorates on this important core question. It's 1 or 2 points different, very slightly lower when we get to the general electorate, and that's not a reflection of higher no, it's really higher don't know among the general electorate than the primary electorate. So can't really say with any certainty whether one would be more productive than the other in terms of moving ahead with a measure. There are other trade-offs in terms of the time to run a campaign, the size of the electorate, and so on to consider. But it looks like a similar level of support across the two. We did see some demographic differences. Women slightly more supportive than men. Alameda County slightly more supportive than Contra Costa. Lots of very strong support among African-American voters, women of color, older women, renters, progressives, and liberals stand out as being stronger supporters of a potential revenue measure. Then on the next slide, you'll see some of the areas for investment that tested very strongly, and we'll show you these numbers in more detail in just a minute, but protecting against wildfires really stood out as the most urgent and important priority to voters, with 92% saying that was an important priority, 61% saying it was extremely important. So it's very much on people's minds, even though we're now a few months removed from the fire season. Is nevertheless something people are very, very concerned about. Also quite strong to high priority on increasing wildlife conservation, and then good numbers, positive numbers on a whole range of other areas of investment. So it's not like there are any areas, most of these areas people want to support and invest in, but these are the two that jump to the top in testing them. And we see some particularly high ratings among some of these subgroups, women, Black voters, and so on, but all together, high ratings across most of these priorities, with wildfires standing out. A second tier included the infrastructure repair and updates of visitor facilities, reducing erosion and improving the quality of water in the creeks, and employment opportunities and job training. So all of that also pretty high, well over 2/3 saying those are important, and a little over 1/3 saying they were extremely important. From there, on the next slide, you see the findings about visiting the parks. We wanted again to test this question of barriers, and as you know, we had some important findings here in the community survey last year. We still found the top barriers to visiting the parks among voters in East Bay include personal safety. This is their mentions of what might cause them sometimes to be a barrier to them to visit the parks. 15% mentioning personal safety, 12% restrooms, lack of restrooms or facilities, 12% not wanting to go alone, 11% not having parks close to them. And we do see some slightly greater concerns among older women, Latinx voters, women of color, as noting these personal safety as a concern, or not wanting to go alone, transportation being a barrier for some, and they mentioned potentially transit or shuttles as a possible solution for them. And for those who mentioned personal safety, some mentions of wanting increased staff as a way to potentially address that barrier, and not wanting to go alone. And there's a range of thoughts on that as well. So these are some of the barriers that we identified in this survey. From here, on the next slide, you'll see that the one thing that would make it easier to access the parks was 11% saying, well, if I had more free time, I would like to go more. Feeling perhaps, in spite of the pandemic and everything else, that they still have busy lives and not getting out as much as they would like. Having fewer crowds, having more information, also things that some people mention. But a lot of people say there's nothing in particular that would make it easier. They feel like they do have easy access to the parks and they use them. So from there, Jacqueline will go through some of the basic findings on the lay of the land and people's attitudes, and then I'll come back for the last portion of the numbers here.
Okay, yeah, so as David said, I'll go through some of this in a little more detail. So we'll start, with the lay of the land section. So if we can go to the next slide. So here we asked respondents whether or not they were familiar with the Parks District. 9 in 10 voters are familiar, and 60% are very familiar. Only 11% say they've never heard of the East Bay Regional Park District. And then on to the next slide. And then as far as how often people visit, we're seeing over half are visiting at least on a monthly basis, with 5% saying they're visiting the East Bay Regional Park District at least daily, about 1 in 10 twice a week, 15% on a weekly basis, about a quarter visiting on a monthly basis. And then we see another quarter who are rarely visiting, and then only about 8% who are never visiting, and then another 9 for special occasions. And then on to the next slide. And then as far as where people receive information about the East Bay Regional Park District, we see almost a third are getting this information from, word of mouth, friends, family, or colleagues. And a quarter, and this was, you could select multiple options, so this won't add up to 100%, but a quarter are getting information directly from the East Bay Regional Park website. And then, quite a few from newspaper and television. And then we see, a fair amount are getting information from electronic sources like apps such as All Trails or the East Bay Regional Park District News, their Facebook page or Instagram, quite a bit lower rated. And then, East Bay Park District staff, community groups, Twitter, only, a few, 2 to 3% are getting information from those sources. And then only 19% say they do not receive any information at all. So most people in the region are receiving some information about the East Bay Regional Park District. And then on to the next slide. So now talking about increased funding for the Park District, we can move on. So we give respondents some potential investment areas that they were asked to rate whether it was extremely important, very important, somewhat important, or not too important, or not at all important investment areas. We found that by far the most important investment areas protecting against catastrophic wildfires, which we know is important in the region and throughout California. Also, kind of the top tier priorities include increased wildlife conservation. Those are definitely the top 2. And then the second tier priorities are infrastructure repair and updating existing visitor use facilities, reducing erosion and sediment to improve water quality of urban creeks, and reducing storm erosion for improved creek water quality and natural habitats. So for those second tier priorities, about 75% are rating those as at least somewhat important, with a third or a little more rating those as very important. And then on to the next slide, we'll see sort of the third tier priorities, which include employment opportunities for youth and formerly incarcerated people, regional trail connectivity for commuters, establishing a community program for residents of underserved areas, and developing, operating, and maintaining new park facilities. So we're seeing about 2/3 or around there are rating these as at least somewhat important, with about a third or less rating these as very important. We did a split sample experiment where we asked how they rated employment opportunities and job training for the youth compared with employment opportunities and job training for formerly incarcerated people. And we found that there was about an 8-point bump for job training for the youth. So that's a little bit more important to voters, but even still about 60% think it's important to have employment opportunities and job training for formerly incarcerated people. And then now we asked if they support increased funding for the park district. So the exact wording is, given the reduction in tax revenue caused by the coronavirus pandemic and budget needs for the East Bay Regional Park District, would you support or oppose increased funding for the East Bay Regional Park District to invest in the priority areas that we showed on the previous slides? So here, 71% do support increased funding for the East Bay Regional Park District, and only 15% oppose. 14% aren't sure at this point. So this is a pretty high number, and we see almost half, so about 44% strongly support increased funding for the Park District. Within that, we see there's the highest support among older women, those in Alameda County, those who rent their home, Black voters, and those with fewer than 20 years in the East Bay, living in the East Bay. So those would be the biggest supporters of an increased revenue at this point. And I think I'll hand it back over to David to talk about some of the messaging.
Great. And then I would just note on that vote for the revenue, right? We did not have a specific dollar amount or tax level or anything like that. And of course, you'll want to look into that going forward to test the viability of a specific measure. But that base level of support with the 71% is certainly a good sign for the possible inclusion of a revenue measure on the ballot. So from here, we also wanted to look at the messaging. And again, this is not, we don't yet have a specific measure. There's no campaign here. This is not a full test by any means of what might happen in a ballot measure effort, but we did want to get a sense of which areas if we talked about some of the reasons why the Park District might need this additional revenue, which of these reasons for making a brief argument to voters about why it's important would potentially resonate the strongest. And we did see some real differentiation among these messages. You see this graph here, that the several points difference between these messages does suggest that certain things, certain areas of focus when we're communicating with the public are going to be more productive in terms of building support for revenue. And the question was, how convincing is this statement as a reason to increase funding for the East Bay Regional Park District? And you see here the top rated message, and we'll show you what these are in just a second, is related to that fire safety, prevention of wildfires, which of course we saw also in the question about what people were most concerned about rising to the top, and we see it in the messaging as well. So a message that focuses on the need for investment and resources devoted to that priority. 83% saying that was a convincing message, 53% very convincing, and that's a goes well beyond the existing support that we have in the community. So that does suggest a real intense and positive response to that message. And then 4 others that we tested, and in rank order in terms of their impact with that very convincing number, which tells you someone was really moved by the information in the message. One about public access, one focused on the work that the staff of the Park District does in the parks, one focused on climate change, and then the last lowest rated but still fairly strong message had to do with jobs in the region. So from here on the next slide, you'll see what people responded to in terms of visiting the parks. The largest barrier, and this is really the question of what were the barriers to residents in terms of whether they were able to visit and use the East Bay parks as much as they would like. And this was, we had a wide range of different reasons that people might have for not being able to visit the parks. Personal safety came up first and foremost, which out of this list, which 1 or 2 are biggest barriers to you, 15%, which is, not most people, but it is a significant part of the population, 15% saying that personal safety is an issue for them when they consider visiting the parks. A lack of appropriate restrooms or other facilities, 12%, not wanting to go alone, 12%, not having parks close to where you reside, 11%. Those are the 4 main things that rose out of this list. And then a second tier, which is more for less than 10% of the people, but still significant for some: transportation, limited information or maps, not knowing where the parks are, how to access them, lack of recreational activities they're interested in, fees, lack of programs, and down at 2%, fear of wildlife, 1% language barriers. So certain things obviously more important to more people as potential barriers than others. And we did have a quarter saying there was something else. But when we broke down that other category, a lot of them actually they fit within these same categories of either safety, facilities or transportation. It's just they were using their own words. They weren't picking from our list here. Only 18% said they had no barriers at all. From here on the next slide, you can see the open-ended question. This is within, so people who said, one of my barriers is transportation, the follow-up question was, well, what could the park district do to make transportation less of a barrier? This is open-ended, so we coded it after they just said what they had to say. We had about half the voters who had transportation as an issue saying some kind of transit or shuttles might help. And then some mentioning other accessibility options like signage or directions, 18%, and some of them just saying they don't know. But clearly that does look like something that might address the transportation question for at least some of the folks who find that to be a barrier. On the next slide, you see the same breakdown. The follow-up here was on personal safety. So for people who said personal safety was potentially a barrier for them to visiting the parks, they just generally said safety issues. Could you, address them, please? Whether it's being alone or, feeling vulnerable because of their age. Having rangers on site or staff was mentioned by quite a few people, over a quarter of them. Few mentioned more lighting. And again, some people not sure what the district could do to address the safety question. From there, we also looked at the group that said, I don't want to go alone as a potentially a distinct issue from safety. And in fact, we did have about half of them saying, I don't know what the district could do about that. But we did have within this group that said they didn't want to go to the parks alone. We did have 18% saying, well, it might be useful to have some kind of social group to set up that I could participate with. Something related to access in terms of transit or signage, or again, having more staff on site. And then we then asked a more general question. This is of everyone now, all the voters. What's the one thing that would make it easier for you to access? And again, we tried to break this down. It was an open-ended question, and then we coded this, and we have having more free time. 11% saying that would be the thing. Just wanting to, finding time in their life to be able to go and enjoy the parks. Less crowding for 8%, better maps or better access to information, 8%, a personal age or health issues, more parking, transit options, all 7 or 8%. So there's a number of things there, but there's no like single standout or one or two issues here that really rise to the top. It's kind of a mix of different things that people mention that could make it easier for them. And close to 40% saying there was nothing they could think of that would make it easier. Finally, moving forward, we would say as a general conclusion that we would, that the voters in the East Bay are open to and supportive of increasing funding for the district. Very slightly higher, a couple of points among the primary electorate, those who would be voting in June of 2022. But it's within the margin of error, that difference. We can't say with certainty that one electorate is really more receptive than the other. In either case, you're working with a pretty similar ratio of support. We certainly would recommend more specific research on a particular measure with dollar amounts and ballot language, and of course what is mentioned. We've as many of you know who have been involved in local revenue ballot measures, specifically what is mentioned as being funded in the actual ballot language can be important as well. We have some good indications here, the things that are priorities for voters and the types of issues we want to focus on in communications. But of course, ideally a campaign would specifically test those to be sure what was going to be most strongly supported by the voters. But that certainly looks receptive and like a good possibility that voters could pass a measure if it were on the ballot next year. And then the last slide, I think, is just our specifics in terms of the funding areas. Really want to protect against catastrophic wildfires. So you want to be talking about that a lot in your overall communication and kind of laying the groundwork for how high a priority that is. And then specifically the need for revenue for that, and increasing wildlife conservation. That was a clear number 2 when we had that list of priorities. And when you look at the messages, a message that talks about increased funding that would allow for fire protection and forest management really rises to the top in terms of the intensity of positive response, and people saying that's a convincing reason to support revenue, and a public access message saying that we need our parks and trails now more than ever, referencing the pandemic, and that increased funding would allow for maintenance, expansion, and increased public access, all of which are things people are strongly support. So pretty clear set of findings in terms of how to effectively move forward and potentially get voter support for revenue. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions or comments that you all have on the research. And credit, of course, to Jacqueline and Jennifer Sanchez, both on our team here at LRP, who helped conduct this.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Anyone? I see D.
Yep.
Hi, thank you very much. This is very helpful, and thank you for the good work. My question is 600 enough of is that large enough sample for a population? I mean, we're looking at 2.7 million people that we represent.
Yes. Well, the magic of scientific random sampling, if you do it right, and you take an accurate random sample, in this case from the voter file, because we're interested in registered voters, people who actually turn out and vote. Yes, it's accurate to plus or minus 4%. So all of those percentages I quoted you, we are 95% confident statistically that the actual, if you were to interview every single voter in the East Bay, that the actual true percentage would be within 4 points higher or lower of that number with a 600 sample. And if you look at just the primary sample for June, that was 400 voters, it's basically 5% plus or minus. So very similar margin of error, just a little bit more wiggle room in that, but in both cases, those are quite solid and fairly standard sample sizes for an election poll of this type.
Okay, and then a follow-up question is, were the surveys collected evenly between or split between Contra Costa and Alameda County?
Well, proportionally, not evenly. So if every voter had an equal chance to be in the sample, and the population of the East Bay is about 60-40, I want to say, between the two counties. So that's the proportion in the survey as well. So it's more Alameda than Contra Costa, but obviously substantial portions of both. And those we broke them down. You saw on those tables, and you just saw one or two examples of those tables. We have those tables for every question. And on every question, you can break down and see, okay, in Alameda, it's this, in Contra Costa, it's this. And these are geocoded, so you can break them down other ways too. We actually had 6 regions that we looked at for analysis, but for simplicity, we just reported the 2 counties there.
Oh, great. And then for the demographics that you showed, I guess it was 45% Caucasian and 9% African-American and so on. Was that just the survey, or was that the makeup of the?
That is the that's the makeup of the projected likely electorate in 2022, which is, of course, in the future. So no one knows exactly who will turn out and vote, but based on all known existing voting patterns, who's on the voter file, the race that's coded on the voter file, which is 95% accurate, but there's some variation there. So it's self-reported race in the survey sample, but then it is weighted proportionally to the expected turnout in the 22 election. And that is, in fact, if you look at previous elections in the 2 counties in the East Bay, that's the ratio we would expect, given population shifts over time and how the new voter registrants that have come in the last couple of years, and of course the most recent election, November 2020, which gives us a good read on who the likely voters are in a high turnout election.
Yeah, so it sounds like, let me ask the question again. So is there a possibility of looking at the survey and then targeting and seeing where we are weak in a certain geographic area?
Yes, within reason. Like we would not be able to go down in most cases to the city level because there's just a lot of cities in the East Bay. So any one, Oakland might be the one that would be big enough on its own to look at, but any of the other cities would be too small on their own. Just because you're talking about a handful of surveys, 15 or 20 interviews in a given city, and that's just too few to have or to rely on the numbers. But anything that's more than about well, for the full sample, the 600, anything that's more than like 10 or 12% of the electorate is large enough to break out and analyze. So most of those racial groups are big enough we can break them out and say, oh, here's how we're doing with Latino voters in the East Bay, or African American voters, or API voters. We can also look, as I said, at sub-regions, like 3 regions within Alameda County. I think we looked at like Northwest, Southwest, and East Alameda. And we had 3 breakdowns in Contra Costa as well. So those sort of clusters regionally without, but not super fine, because that's a limitation of the sample size, which is a limitation of the budget eventually.
Yeah, for me, those breakouts are, I think, are important. So
yes, and they're all there. We have a whole, there's hundreds of pages of crosstabs that are, in the hands of the staff and in our hands as well. We can certainly look up any group of interest in terms of which, where we have the strongest support and, potential strongest existing support, potential support, and perhaps those who are more opposed to revenue as well.
And do we have, is there any way we can compare your data with past data from other surveys in the past?
Yes. Yeah, and Lisa is nodding vigorously with the, there's both the, I know the community survey that you've done regularly, but also there have been voter surveys around previous elections and previous revenue measures done by other firms, but using similar methods. We can certainly look and compare them.
Oh, that'd be
Correct.
great.
We have all of our past surveys, so we can do the longitudinal graphs to look at the various support, both on a geographic level as well as on a subject specific level. So that's all possible.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Very helpful.
Dennis, did you have anything, or I would ask the question? I know we've talked about East County, both counties. I think that's worth looking at. I think we've all been wondering if we could if the support level was going up in both counties in the East. And certainly I think for the sake of LARPD, it would be interesting to see what's happening.
Yeah, we can easily recombine the regions so that there's kind of east of the hills, west of the hills, and as a different way of breaking down the region. And that's sort of embedded in those sub-regions I mentioned, but we can also combine them. So you look at the whole East County area for both counties.
Well, it's LARPD doesn't quite include all of that section, but an awful lot of it.
Sure, and we, if there's any definition to look at it, as long as it's large enough and it's at least, at 10% or so of the population, it would be easy to break out.
Okay, good. Dennis?
Well, I just thank you. I think this is a great survey. I find these things fascinating. I'm amazed at some of these things, that personal safety is the most important thing for most of these folks. I sort of knew that, but I didn't know it would be that high. I'm totally amazed that 18% found that there were no barriers, or if I'm interpreting that correctly, and that only 1% found that language was a barrier, which I thought was totally different than that. But it seems, well, I'm amazed by that. And there were no.
Keep in mind that we only had 2. We had English and Spanish in the
right
in our interviewing, but of course there are other languages. They were not. If they didn't also speak English or Spanish, they did not have any way to complete the survey. So they're probably missing some folks. But those are quite small populations who have no English language ability, but there are certainly some in the East Bay, and some of those folks are, would be the ones presumably have the biggest language issues, and we're unable to survey them in this design.
And then mostly I'm amazed about is, as a barrier, nobody mentioned, or wasn't a category that was offered, fees, parking fees, swimming fees, the things that I find kind of offensive to me.
Yeah, not a major concern. It seems like it's at certainly current levels, it's not something that's worrisome to a lot of the voters.
Good quality product, I guess.
Well, it's also, we haven't raised entrance fees in most places for a long time, and I think that's what we want. We don't want.
Right, you don't want it to be a barrier, and at this point, it isn't, which is
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Any further questions or comments?
I don't have any real questions, but I wanted to thank David and Jacqueline. They've been great to work with. A lot of detail, a lot of information here, but if you thought this was a lot, you should see the crosstabs that they provide. And then I did want to, the one observation that hit me today that I hadn't really focused on in previous looking at these numbers, but we have, if you combine the rarely using our parks, only certain events, and never, that's 43% of the population that was surveyed, the voters, aren't really experiencing our parks, yet there's 72% support providing more funding. And I just think that that's really that's a testament to our brand and our service and our people. So I just that one stuck out to me today, so I wanted to mention it. But I really appreciate you all letting us take some time and go through the whole results, and I think they're encouraging. Just keep doing the good work.
D.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting when you guys do your outreach this month. I think that'd be very important to incorporate some of the input from those folks, because those are the people that we haven't been able to reach out to. Hopefully, we'll hear from them. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Thank you.
You know,
Right, we will sign off. Oh, any further questions?
I wanted to say, I think it backs up. I know people who never go to our parks, but they appreciate they're there because they're permanent open space. They've told me that. And I think that explains to a certain extent this group that says, yes, we're like that. And so, even when we pick up new land that we haven't been able to open up, it's still permanent, and they like that.
Makes sense.
But thank you so much for this survey.
Thank you.
Anything further? You may, of course, have more work from Eric. You never know what he and Lisa are up to as they go through those crosstabs. Thanks again. Okay, well, we've skipped around. Are we back now to federal?
Yes, I believe so. And we have a short list of bills,
Okay.
a lot of other matters. And the reason there's a short list of bills is that, and Peter will comment on this later, but Congress is really getting organized for the most part, and obviously was
Some other issues.
some distraction recently. But we do have two categories that are reoccurring legislation that we've supported in the past. And so we just might as well get an early jump on them. The San Francisco Bay Restoration Act actually codifies a program within the Environmental Protection Agency, a grant program for projects in the San Francisco Bay Area. EPA has voluntarily or used discretion to provide a grant program for San Francisco Bay. And as you can read on the screen, that we have received some funding recently from that account. But it's not an official authorized program. It's something that the EPA has been doing kind of on their own. So this bill would actually set it would codify it. So we'd like to support that. And Peter or Lisa, I don't know if you have anything more you want to add on that bill. There will be a Senate bill. I'm sure this is exactly what happened 2 years ago. Jackie Spear got out in front, introduced her bill, and then a few months later, Senator Feinstein introduced the exact same bill. So when we vote today, I'm hoping that is tantamount to supporting the companion bill in the Senate as well.
Great.
I can just add that Senator Feinstein's been helpful through her position on the Appropriations Committee to provide funding in appropriations each year for this program, but this would obviously give it more formality. And so I would recommend supporting it.
Okay.
And then the second bill is actually a reintroduction of a bill that John Garamendi spearheaded last year, which basically just simply codifies the fact that special districts should receive up to 5% of any COVID relief funding that is appropriated by Congress and sent to local governments. So this is a legislative strategy versus working in the negotiations of the back last year, the CARES Act, and then this year now the $1.9 trillion effort that I think Peter will touch on in a little bit. But anyway, the legislation would codify it, and our almost all of our delegation supports it. So we were looking for a support position on that as well.
Okay.
I don't know, Peter, anything else on the bills, or Dee, you had a question?
Yeah, well, I was, I guess Arizona has a lot of special districts. I know they have a regional park system, but I didn't realize if they had more than just that.
They have a lot of fire districts, Dee, and the firemen went to Senator Sama and asked her for her support, and she has led on the issue ever since then. There are a lot of special districts in Texas. There are a lot of special districts in Illinois. Those are two states that have a significant number of special districts. So you'll notice the other lead sponsor of the Senate bill is Senator Cornyn of Texas. He hasn't done much but co-sponsor it, to be honest, but he is a bipartisan co-sponsor of the bill, and that does help, and that gives it some recognition. But I'll be honest, I wish there was more support coming for these bills. I know that there's been individual outreach to various House and Senate members. It's a real tribute to the co-sponsors of the bill, but I wish there was more momentum than there is. But it is the start of a new Congress, and we'll keep plugging away at it. But we need more friends.
And it is a challenge because there is no national special district association. So, you know, there's not a NRPA or a City Parks Alliance for special districts. And so what we have done, and we're going to make another effort after these bills are approved by the full board, we've sent around, and I know Dennis is familiar with this, we've sent around correspondence to other special park districts to encourage them to weigh in, using the Special Park District Forum list, and then also Dennis with the California Association of Recreation and Park Districts. But we're just parks. So, you know, like Peter mentioned, fire, and there's obviously other special districts. You know, we don't have a list for how to communicate with them, and neither does CSDA. So that's been part of our challenge, but as Peter said, we'll keep plugging away. It's important. You know, I think you all remember when we've gone to Washington for almost every bill, we talk about make sure special districts qualify, right? We push for that language and everything. And so this is just another one of those kind of examples.
Great.
Any questions? I guess I'd like to ask, you said there were two states, Texas was one of them, that had a lot of special districts. I know that, being from Texas. Is there some way we can find out a list of special districts in those two states and try to communicate with them, see if they have any kind of organization?
I mean, if my response to that would be, if we can identify, and in Illinois, we certainly can identify some park districts. We should be able to at least reach out to sister park agencies and say, is there a list in your state like a CSDA? So we could do that.
I think if you could go beyond park, it might be helpful, simply because you drag in a whole bunch of people who have other special interests, but I don't know how difficult that is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think just that would be a way in to
Right.
the park, and then we could go from there.
Yeah, okay. Do we not need to go ahead and support those two federal pieces of legislation now?
So moved.
That was good. Cosario's, seconded by Wasby. Any discussion? No. All right, can we have a roll call, please?
President Rosario,
Yes.
Director Waspy,
Yes.
and Chair Director Wieskamp.
Yes. Surprising, it passes. Thank you, Yuli. All right, and on to other federal matters.
So this, I'll invite Peter to present on the current COVID-19 relief funding package and the status of it. It's being called the American Rescue Plan, as you can see on the screen. This is, in my estimation, the president this is his political capital effort. The one big thing he'll probably get done. And I think he's moving a lot of chips to the center of the table to push this through a budget reconciliation process, which is similar to what President Obama did with Obamacare. So unlikely to be a bipartisan outcome. There may be some bipartisanship, but I think this is kind of the one shot. So we're working hard. I know Peter's been working really hard to try to make sure special districts are included. We're running into some hiccups with that. Partially, I think, because the appropriators just don't want to give up that discretion, and they want to, and cities and states have much, as we just mentioned, we don't have a special district advocacy group, but cities and counties do. So I think we're having a difficult time, but I know Peter's been working really hard at it, and I'd like to encourage him to say a few words about the process and where we are right now.
So there's a tight timeline for this bill because the unemployment insurance expires on March 15th. And so they are pushing next week to pass these bills out of committee, out of their respective committees, and then move these on the House floor and Senate floor, pass them in both the House and Senate in time to meet that March 15th deadline. So that's the track that they're on. And as of right now, it appears that they'll meet their goal. As Eric noted, there is a lot of emphasis being put forward by House leaders and Senate leaders, along with the president, to try and get this done. I don't know if it will be at $1.9 trillion at the end of the day. Right now in the bill is $350 billion for states and localities. And to date, there just has not been a willingness to adjust that formula and to allow for other units of local government to be eligible. We're making headway and talking to a lot of sympathetic House members and Senate members that understand the importance of transit, fire, sanitation, parks. But I'm just one person and I need more help. So that's where we are. But there's progress being made. I'm just worried that, this, in terms of more money for states and localities, this could be the last train leaving the station. So I'm doing the best at making the case and trying to collaborate with others and other members, like we talked about earlier, that have been real leaders on the issue.
We all appreciate your efforts. And I understand what the president's doing too.
Dee, did you have a question?
Peter, would it make sense to follow the lead or talk to obviously the fire districts have a lot of recognition because they're fire. Is there an opportunity to collaborate with those special fire districts in the nation?
Sorry, Dee, could you repeat your question?
I was wondering if there's because fire is special fire districts are as we just heard, that there's a large amount in Texas and California. Is there a way to have them lead a special districts effort and just hang on to their coattails in collaboration, you know?
No, it's a really good question. I think they absolutely would be. I think transit and fire would be the people that we would, because I've had conversations with Senator Schumer's office. They're supportive of this. They understand the importance of transit in their city of New York, in the state of New York. But fire also could be the real leaders on this. Absolutely. Again, we could talk about it offline. The sponsors of this are willing to do so much, but they're not willing to do exactly what you're asking, Dee, which is lean in and collaborate with their fire districts to, do the virtual fly into Washington and make the case why we need to be a part of this bill, which is really what we need to be doing right now, to kind of, squeaky wheel wins at the end of the day here, and it's not happening.
Look upon it as something we can work on in the future. I think that's a great idea, the transit and fire districts. People care about those quite a bit.
Yeah.
As well as our parks, of course.
Yes. But there's not a person that I speak to, a staff member or a member of Congress, who doesn't understand or recognize how important parks have been during this pandemic. So we're making a good case, and people are sympathetic, but I don't know, somebody just needs to prevail upon the Appropriations Committee, because they're stuck in the mud, and we're having a hard time. I think that's the sticking point at the moment. We'll keep working it.
And to that point, Peter, we have had conversations with NRPA and City Parks Alliance about advocating for parks, not special districts, but just parks. And so we might be able to get additional traction that way, because we are hearing it in every phone call with an elected, every meeting we have with people. The recognition of how important parks has been, it comes up organically. So it's another avenue that we're working on exploring.
Yeah, I spoke with the LWCF Coalition today to ask them about, to the extent they're being asked about this issue or they're hearing about it. They've heard about it from some of their members. It's not, top of mind, and they've been so focused on LWCF implementation and trying to unwind the bad stuff the previous administration just did with it. But they want to stay in touch and find ways to be helpful on this particular issue. So started that. They've heard from some members about this at the kind of city park level, and the need that's there. But so I shared some additional information with them, and I'll keep working with them as well.
Okay. Any other questions?
This is Doug. I have a question, Peter. So I haven't seen, I think I've seen some of the language around the allocations associated with states and locals. But is it very specific in the language when the states receive the funding? Is it clearly articulated how they're required to spend those dollars?
They have flexibility. They could get money to special districts.
Well, and I'm asking because are they block grants to the states where the states have some discretion then ultimately? Because going back to Dee's point about fire districts, at least in California, along with park districts, transit, I mean, if there's that opportunity where, the Special Districts Association working with fire districts, working with the transit districts, working with the park districts, can we amass a coalition? Does the state have the opportunity, the ability to then suballocate to districts?
They do. The way I read the language, they absolutely do. It's a good question, Doug. What it's come down to is there just wasn't enough money for every state, even though they got quite a bit of money, or a county, or a large city. That's the way the formula was broken out. They kept the money to themselves and didn't share it. And but they do, the way the language is written, states, counties definitely have the ability to spread the wealth. The way I read it.
Real quick, how are the states are receiving their dollars? It's just population, pure population?
Correct.
With minimums for the smaller states and the like?
Right.
Is there a calculation as to what California is anticipated to receive?
I haven't seen a calculation for this amount. I'll go back and see if there's something out there. I haven't seen one yet, but I could take the old formula and figure it out.
Yeah, just a ballpark. I'd be curious. Okay, thanks.
That sounds like important flexibility. Okay. Next.
So we have a standing item for the better utilizing investment to leverage development. This is the successor to the Tiger Grant Program, which is a federal transportation grant. We've had a number of conversations lately about this program and advancing it. The board received a presentation, I believe, at the last board meeting. So I don't think we need to go deep into what the program is and our process for project development, which we're currently undergoing with a consultant. But I did want to ask Lisa and Peter to speak to a recent meeting that we had with a representative from the Department of Transportation. And I also wanted to report that we had a very positive conversation with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, supporting our interest in a bill grant, which was, they were pretty much just carte blanche. We'll support you, which is great. But I think that the DOT information that we gleaned this last week, and thank you, Peter, for that meeting. It was very informative. It will inform our strategy moving forward in terms of our outreach and also, frankly, the grant application formulation and the things that we will be emphasizing. So, Lisa, do you mind talking a little bit about the meeting and your notes from it?
Happy to. So on Tuesday, Eric, Peter, and I had the honor of meeting with Kim Bathrick at the Department of Transportation, and she shared with us some statutory as well as some insights from the department with changing leadership. And so as was discussed at the board meeting on Tuesday, the build criteria, which was established by Congress, is consistent every year. So those are safety, state of good repair, economic competitiveness, environmental sustainability, and quality of life. The BUILD program also emphasizes innovation and partnerships. So as a 33-city, 2-county agency, we're hoping to utilize those and bridge those into this application for support, and look forward to attending meetings with the board with local elected officials to garner that support. And then additionally, she shared with us that the DOT's leadership is likely to emphasize racial equity and climate change in this round of applications in terms of some sub-criteria for the project. So as we're looking at what a competitive application for the district should be, as well as what our narrative should focus on, equity and a solution to a changing climate are two key areas. Additionally, just a couple limitations for the board to be aware of. On Tuesday, we presented you a list of 21 projects. Not all 21 can go into this application, and for that reason, it's a 30-page application in which we need to describe every single project. Each project needs to have a 20% match, and so within that 30-page, we have to figure out how many projects can we fully represent robustly to put forward. So we're expecting it to be posted around April 26th. Then there's a 90-day application window, and the award notices will come in November of 2021. It should be noted for the planning projects, there's a 30 million ceiling on planning grant applications, which means that the agency can only distribute 30 million worth of planning grants. And of that 30 million, 10 million must go to areas of persistent poverty across the nation. So it's likely that planning grants would be less competitive than construction grants going forward into the application. Additionally, we're looking for a theme narrative. So when we're putting forward a grouping of projects, we want to make sure that we're telling that story of regional connectivity, connections to park, connections to transit center, and connections for the community within the community. And we were really strongly encouraged to put the quantitative data that's going to go into the cost benefit analysis section of the application, but to also put that information within the narrative portion of the application. She shared with us the good insight that the application's reviewed in phases by different groupings of DOT staff, which means the first staff will only be reading that narrative. They won't be looking at the cost benefit analysis. So the more information we can embed from the cost benefit analysis into that narrative, the stronger and more competitive our application will be. And then she also really emphasized showing success of past projects with federal funding, NEPA permits, et cetera. And so within this application, as we've been discussing kind of all along, connecting ourselves to the success of our Tiger grant, to how we were able to fully commit and deliver those projects within the time frame will make us an even stronger application package. So those were my notes. And if Eric and Peter want to fill in anything I missed.
Just to give some more color, great summary by Lisa. 656 applications last year in the build grant. About, on average, about $9 million was the award, and there were 70 awardees. So, you know, they like to say they were 9 times oversubscribed in terms of applications to awardees. So I feel very good about the story in the application that the Park District will be able to put together a very competitive grant. Just some other data points to share. NEPA is important to consider in, you know, where we are in the NEPA process of each project, because it wasn't a stumbling block in our experience in 2010, but it was an issue that came up in the application process and then after we received the award. So to the extent a project is ready to be built, I think will be held in high regard in that respect, or make the application more competitive. To the extent the board members, as we start to reach out to local leaders, state leaders, members of our congressional delegation to ask them for letters of support. I think that'll be really helpful. I know that some of you may be participating on mayors' conferences via Zoom or have a reason to be interacting with local officials. We're going to need their support. And it may just be literally, can I get your email so I can send you a draft letter and have your staff, you know, make edits to it. But that will be coming sooner rather than later, that request. That'll probably be a March kind of request. So I'll stop there. I'm sure Eric's probably got some additional comments too.
I don't have a lot more at this time. I do think the parameters of the amount, the ceiling for the application and the number of pages and all the other criteria that Lisa went through really leads me to believe that our list is probably going to be smaller than, maybe smaller than Tiger, because just to get everything in, we're really going to have to narrow it down. And as Peter pointed out, having it shovel ready, you know, we have to make sure that those are the kinds of projects we're putting in. What the only other interesting, well, I shouldn't say only, but one other interesting thing that was mentioned was on the match, that having more match than 20% didn't actually help you. It was not it would not be a determining factor or an advantage. So I just found that as kind of interesting that it wouldn't, because you would think common sense you would think it would. But I think one other thing that I will reiterate that Peter mentioned is that if you are in correspondence, and Dee, I know you had an event earlier today where you were in correspondence with other electeds. It is helpful to let people know that we're applying. Now, I understand we don't have the actual what is it yet. So it's a little hard to do advocacy, but I think mentioning that we're applying or planning to apply at least gets it on people's radar, and they'll be more ready for it when we make the ask.
Also want to add to that, if any board member is speaking with an elected official and want to know which projects within their jurisdiction we're considering, please feel free to email government affairs, and we're happy to put together a package to help communicate what we're looking at within whichever city or jurisdiction.
I assume all would like that.
Hey, did you have a question?
Yes. Lisa, you talked about data, and do we have or have we been collecting data on those past Tiger Grant projects?
On the past Tiger Grant projects, all of those we've been collecting eco counter, trail counter data, so that has the bike and the ped, and so we can also speak to the equity within that area, look at census and the other. I mean, our GIS team is amazing. So we can compile that for all of the previous projects. And then additionally, for all of the projects that we're proposing, we're working with Alta Planning right now to map out equity, to map out usage trends, to map out safety based off police reports and others, and really compile which data we have to support our looking forward application. But yes, we have the information on the past projects we can couple it with.
Great.
And Dee, just to clarify, the Tiger program actually required trail counters to be put in place.
Yeah. Cool. This is slightly off the subject, but it's on data. Do we have trail counters at Judge John Sutter?
We'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, that was a question that Doug McConnell had asked. If we'd seen an increase in the use, not only for Judge John Sutter, but also the Zuckerman Trail. So it'd be interesting. Thank you.
And Director Rosario, that's certainly trail counters is an area that we're trying to expand throughout the district, because that is so key to so many issues.
Yeah, we need it. We need those numbers. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on this?
Oh, one last question. How soon do you anticipate having which projects? Because I know this is a tight deadline. So
Pretty soon.
For us to solicit letters, we need to know, I guess, pretty soon.
The staff is expecting to have a recommended project list of about maybe 6 to 8 projects in March. So Alta will conclude their phase 1 analysis with all of the data and information to determine the competitiveness of each project. We'll be pairing that with readiness. So that way we know, are we ready to go for the different permits, as well as that match funding is probably going to be one of the key criteria of what we can move forward. And so we'll likely have that list by late March.
Great. Thank you.
It's a Lisa promise. I heard that. Dennis, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
Okay, and moving on.
So I'll just briefly touch on Land and Water Conservation Fund and implementation. You probably recall that last year Congress permanently funded the Land and Water Conservation Fund at $900 million per year with a lot of bipartisan support. The previous administration reversed, literally stopped in its tracks and reversed implementation of many of these things. So the new administration has been wonderfully getting these issues addressed. Literally, these reversals and undoing of the urban parks program were done on inauguration day. So it's the current administration has made some announcements on February 11th to revoke some of these secretarial orders and restrictions that were put in place by the past administration. So they're righting the ship, and questions are now, when will grants start to be administered again? I've been in touch with our good friend at the National Park Service, Joel Lynch. They're working through that. They don't have any time frames yet, but we we obviously have pending applications and anxious to hear from them once they make those decisions. I think it's probably going to be the second half of the year when we hear something from them. But good thing is that we've got a new program that's being implemented correctly, and we'll wait to learn more in the coming weeks.
No questions?
And I don't know if Doug is on still, but correspondingly, the state has to also update its recreation plan, park and recreation plan, which is something kind of in the process in order to accept the Land and Water Conservation Fund dollars.
Yeah, I'm here, and I haven't forgotten, Eric. In fact, I was just texting you and Lisa. I have not got a response back from DPR or OGALS as to the status of where they're at on the implementation of the new revised score for that plan.
Great.
Okay.
I'm happy to go to the next agenda item, the Outdoor Restoration Force Act and Civilian Conservation Corps. Today, a $9 billion bill, it's called the 21st Century Civilian Conservation Corps Act, was introduced by Senators Wyden and Congressman Neguse of Colorado. I think this actually, I need to go back and look at the bill again, but we were talking earlier about compromised trees. This is the kind of bill that should be eligible for addressing, this kind of expensive treatment. It's a large, well-funded bill. And so that, we're looking at addressing compromised trees in some shape or form. That activity should be eligible in this bill, and we should be able to make that case. I just need to go back and take a look at the language again. I hadn't had a chance to do that today because it was just introduced again.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of bipartisan momentum behind this effort, but the White House has also talked about a civilian climate corps, and nobody knows what that means. So they've got to add some meat around the bones on their proposal. But the good thing is Congress and the House and Senate have bills that were introduced last year. A lot of collaboration was done to get to that point, and in this very challenging economic time, this bill is getting a serious second look. And so we need to talk again about ways to be supportive of the effort as they ramp up their efforts in Capitol Hill.
And the Climate Conservation Corps, Peter, you made a good point that might not attract bipartisan support, but there was an article about it in the LA Times, I think yesterday. So we can, it will be in your next Ledge Committee packet, but we can also send that around if folks are interested.
Just mention two other quick items. A public lands bill that covered some wilderness areas in California, Colorado, and other parts of the country. It would total 1.5 million acres of new wilderness and 1,000 miles of new wild and scenic rivers. That will be considered and passed likely by the House next week. Now, with a new Senate, the prospects of that bill passing are much better. Last year, the House, you may remember, passed that bill when we had our meetings in Washington. And Senator Harris's office, among others, was talking about it because they were pretty excited to see progress on that bill. So that bill would be passed by the House next week, and the Senate will hopefully take it up in the first half of the year or so. I just know that was of interest because it covered the north coast of California, the central coast of California, and Southern California, new wilderness areas and new wild and scenic rivers. So just want to mention that. And the Interior Department Secretary nominee, the confirmation hearing will be held next Wednesday. There's been much anticipation of this hearing, and I would expect quite a bit of fireworks actually at the hearing. There's been a variety of views about the administration's policies, and I think that will come to the forefront in the form of this nomination hearing, for better or for worse. So it could be more partisan than it probably needs to be. Not a lot of other names have been mentioned for the other sub-cabinet positions. Those will be coming soon. No one's been mentioned. There's been some names mentioned for Park Service Director, but not names recently. They have 1,000 political appointees in place now. There's usually 3,000 political appointees in the administration once they're fully staffed. About 1,000, about 800 of them require Senate confirmation. So it's going to take some time to move through that process, but that's all I've got. Eric, you probably have a few other items you want to mention.
No, I mean, I think it will be interesting to see who is chosen for National Park Service Director, and then likewise also who some of the appointments for Department of Transportation will be as we think about the Bill grant. We already know who the secretary is, but some of the undersecretaries will be of interest. But yeah, it's a long process, and the one challenge that I think Peter may have mentioned before is that there's only about a 2-seat margin in the House, so they have to sequence any House member that's even if their seat is a safe Democratic seat, if they are going to be appointed, they have to sequence it in a way that the special elections happen, not all at once, but in a series. So it's a very closely divided government right now.
Right. Okay. Anything further?
Eric, did you want to talk at all about committee assignments by the delegation, or not at this time?
Well, we have a bit of a slideshow, but we can, if people are, the meeting's kind of going along, so people, in the interest of time, we could do that at a different meeting if that's preferred.
Pleasure of the board.
I have nothing else going on.
It's fascinating. Let's go.
I think keep going. Seems like you've got us.
Okay. Yuli, do you want to bring up the slides? And I want to thank Yuli for putting the slides together for this particular discussion. And you can go to the first slide. So we didn't know the assignments when we made our presentation about priorities, so we thought that you all might want to know what our folks have been assigned to. So Senator Feinstein is still the chair of the Energy and Water Development Subcommittee. That is important for public Army Corps projects. So we're talking about maybe looking at some of those for the Park District as a possible way to get more additional revenue to some of our shoreline efforts. And then also she's on the Interior Environment Subcommittee. So that's also an important place for things like, land and water conservation and other efforts that may be in the future. Our new senator, Alex Padilla, two things that we know. One is that he's been assigned to the Environment and Public Works Committee. That is a very important committee for transportation, and the federal transportation bill will be expiring in September. And one of the biggest, most contentious issues 5 years ago when Senator Boxer was actually chair of our ranking member of Energy and Environment and Public Works was actually the active transportation money. So all the trail money was the biggest stickiest point of contention between herself and Senator Inhofe on the other side. So it is important to have a senator on that committee for transportation related projects. And that's also a committee that would be looking at Army Corps projects as well. And then the other thing we know is that he was named chair of the Immigration Subcommittee of Judiciary. Next slide, please. So Representative Mike Thompson doesn't have a committee that would necessarily impact the Park District, but the select revenue measures that he's the subcommittee that he's a chairperson for, that will likely be where tax reform legislation will be considered. So any effort or any engagement in terms of the tax policies of the previous administration would be considered by his subcommittee, and so it'd have a lot of impact there. And I believe there were some provisions in the tax reform bill that potentially could have impacted donations to the foundation and some other things that would be of interest to the Park District. And Representative Thompson has always been a super supportive member, and his staff, Cora, has been a super supporter of the Park District. Representative Jerry McNerney, the Energy and Commerce Committee does have some overlap with the Park District, so it'd be good to have him there. Representative Mark DeSaulnay actually may have the best portfolio of committees for Park District's interests, transportation. So that's everything from the bill grant application and trail funding to other issues with railways and rail lines like we had in Miller Knox and are having in Niles Canyon. So very, very important to have a friend on that committee. And then the Rules Committee is the most powerful committee in Congress, or in the House at least. It sets the agenda, or it implements the agenda set by the leadership and sets the rules of debate. So because of that, he has a lot of influence in terms of things that can come to the floor. And we will talk about, I think I'll let Peter talk about earmarks later, but it's important for him to if he's on that powerful committee, he should be able to get a few earmarks passed through. Representative Barbara Lee, next slide, sorry, Yuli. She's still on the Appropriations Committee. She's moved around on some of her subcommittees. She had been on the Military Construction and Veterans Committee, which was of importance to the VA hospital out in Alameda Point. I'm sure she still has influence on that subcommittee. So we'll continue to talk to her about some of those efforts. And like Barbara Lee, Eric Swalwell is on the Steering and Policy Committee. That's not listed here because that's a internal Democratic Party committee. But what it really means is it is the branch of the leadership that is assigned to help make committee assignments. So it has they have a tremendous amount of influence over their colleagues and where their colleagues end up serving. So those are very important positions, and to have two people from the East Bay delegation part of that policy committee is really a plus for the Park District. And then Ro Khanna serves on the Armed Services Committee, so that has some relevance to us regarding all the former military properties that we're still working on. The land transfer in Oakland at the Army base, the development of Concord, I mentioned Alameda. So we've got a number of things that are happening in that space that Ro Khanna could be helpful to us. And I believe that's the end of our delegation. Next slide. So moving forward, we'll keep communicating with them on the items that we discussed and anything else that comes up.
I'll just note that I've had some communication early on with Senator Padilla's office. They've been responsive, great to work with. I'm excited to work with them, and talking with them right now about, in the transportation bill, the same things that we were able to achieve to make sure special districts were eligible for bike and pedestrian trail grants, doing that same thing in the Senate transportation bill, or the Senate infrastructure bill. So they're staffing up, and they've got so many things they're working on, but they've been generous with their time so far, and just really impressed with the people they brought on board so far.
And Peter, would you like to speak just a little bit about the earmark issue?
So they've used different terms. They're calling it earmarks, or community designated grants is another term, but it's unclear right now how much, what will be the limit or the amount a member can request for a project. So I've heard as low as $1 million, which wouldn't be very much, but historically it's been much higher, but that was 10 years ago. So it's, they're trying to figure out internally right now in discussions and negotiations what the limit will be. Can it just one project from one member, or how many projects per member? What's the maximum amount they can request? That's still to be worked out. But the power of the purse has always been with Congress. A lot of people have been excited about this change. And a lot of people at least felt like it was an abdication of their responsibility by giving so much of the decision-making power to the executive branch to decide these programs that Congress authorized, then not be able to make sure that they were having projects happen or programs happen in their home districts or their states. So it's a positive change for most people. The reason why earmarks got removed was some abuse of the earmarks back by some Republican members. So the Republicans, when they took over in the majority, said, we're not going to have any more earmarks. And that was that. So we're going to get back on the bike and ride again.
Okay. Anything further?
Okay, our last item, I believe, is the strategy for inclusive community engagement. So Lisa and I will share in this, and I use the word share liberally because we've done a ton of great work on this. So this is the introductory slide, and I'll just kind of set it up, and then Lisa will run with it. But Carol Johnson and Bob Nisbet, about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, put together a blueprint for how to improve our community engagement when we go out for recommendations on land use plans or grant projects that we're seeking grant funding for that might need community support. So there was an effort to bring that to the fore, and we've not fully examined it thoroughly, and it's not something that's been implemented. And so Carol, working with Lisa and I and Christina, has helped guide us in terms of putting together an effort which is really 3 efforts that are basically aimed at the same thing, and Lisa will go into that, that will help us have a little bit more of a roadmap. And I think it probably ultimately will also weave into the DEI work that is being done by the Deputy General Manager and Catherine Dudley. So next slide, please, Lisa. And then just, in terms of the project goals, we are really trying to make sure, let me take a step back. When we passed Measure FF, it overperformed by about 7 percentage points, meaning we got 7 point, more than the last poll that we had. And so similar to what we were talking about, the 46% of the people that don't really go to our parks, but 72% would support funding. we realized that there was a whole, and I think you brought this up, Dee, there was a whole population of people who were using our parks, voting to fund our parks, that we hadn't really thoroughly been communicating with or listening to. And so with that in mind, Government Affairs, and particularly with Lisa's leadership, launched the Park and Public Interest Survey in 2019 to find out where the sort of the pockets of, where we weren't hearing from people. And so we commissioned a 2020 academic follow-up with Lake Research Partners to hone in on some of those population centers. And I think, Dee, you were asking today, can we identify them? And with this new survey, I think we can. But we also want to make sure that we're communicating in general, not just about a ballot measure. And so this is an effort, and cross-divisionally. So this is an effort to develop a coordinated process to listen and understand and engage with the diverse voices of the community. It will guide our decision-making to some extent in terms of services, amenities, and communication strategy. And then obviously, if we were to have a funding measure, it would help guide that. And then it also makes sure that cross-departmentally that we're being consistent, that every division is utilizing the same process and also communicating with each other. And you'll see it later in this presentation how cross-divisional this effort is. And I give a lot of credit to Lisa on that front too. Next slide, please. And there you go. And I think at this point, I will actually ask Lisa to speak to this, because this is a lot of her great work in bringing people together and combining efforts on this effort.
Thank you, Eric. So as Eric stated, in 2019, we did that big push 4-language survey across the district. We were pleased to get over 8,000 responses, and we learned some things. We learned about cell phone usage, and I do want to highlight someone who contributed strongly to that work, whose name is not currently before you, which is Kim Tai. It was really helpful with putting together that survey toolkit and getting us out in the parks to administer it. And so that 2019 survey was just a wealth of information for us, both from what we learned from the community on barriers and access and inclusion, but also where we didn't hear as loudly as we were hoping to hear from geographic areas, as well as demographic grouping, so age groups, et cetera. And so right now we're going to be sharing an outline of a project that was inspired, a lot of it from that 2019 survey, but also from the investment in the cross-divisional work that was done as part of that survey. And so the names you see before you are folks who are currently contributing to the strategy for inclusive engagement, who are taking time out of their day to help build a cross-divisional toolkit to communicate with broader stakeholders across the community and build relationships, and to understand the results of these various surveys and how we can learn and implement the information. So with that, I'll speak so these are 3 separate but complementary projects. So the first one, go ahead and shift you on my screen, is our Listen project. So these are facilitated community discussions. We had our first listening session last week, and I'll talk a little bit more about it on the upcoming slide. We're working with the Center for Regional Change at UC Davis, which is a group that really works on building relationships within communities on a regional level to help influence policy and policy decisions. So they do exactly what we were hoping to partner with a professional on. The second one is our Coordinate, which is our internal public engagement plan. And that was stemmed from, we're doing all of this good work cross-divisionally, a lot of good energy, and folks are coming to the table, but we don't really have, say, like a roadmap within the district at this time in terms of a checklist, in terms of, well, what's public affairs role, what's government affairs role, what's planning's role. We know it because we've worked together for a long time, but for new folks coming to the district, there's no sort of place they can turn to learn how and who to connect with on what. And so we're working with Shalana De Silva, who's a professional consultant. She has a deep history in grant writing, government affairs work, and community relationships through a Jedi lens. So she's fabulous. And then lastly is our Understand. And this is our local community information guides. And we're working with a team of environmental policy and management master's students from UC Davis. And they came to us actually, and they were interested in doing a project that combined GIS and policy. And so we had the perfect project for them because our 2019 survey is mappable. And so they're working on mapping out that survey, and we'll talk a little bit more about what they're hoping to analyze on the upcoming slides. So first we have our facilitated community discussions. And this is the project with the Center for Regional Change at UC Davis. And as I shared in that 2019 survey, we not only heard a lot of good information, we also identified some geographic areas and some community groups who were lower in response. And so this facilitated community discussions and a follow-up survey are going to be conducted the first 6 months of 2021. What's happening right now is last week we hosted our first community listening session. We had participation from members of the Park Advisory Committee, the Multicultural Advisory Committee, the Regional Parks Foundation, and community leaders, as well as interpretation and recreation partners. And so these were folks who have a long-standing, dedicated partnership with the Park District, who regularly take time out of their day to engage with the Park District. And so this first listening session was aiming at understanding, well, what led you to do that? What makes it worth your while to come and engage with us? What brought you to the table in the first place? And who are you not seeing at the table right now? And how can we expand the table, bring more folks to it? The second and third listening sessions will be with community groups who maybe they do programs out in the park, but they currently don't sit on any sort of advisory committee, or we're seeking to build stronger relationships with that community group because we don't have any sort of formal relationship. So those will be taking place next Thursday and Friday, and we're really excited to have President Rosario come and join us to welcome the participants and share about the East Bay Parks and all of the opportunities to partner, volunteer, and work with us. Once these listening sessions have concluded, the Center for Regional Change team will be taking what they learned, the dialogue that was had, the barriers that were identified, and putting it into a community survey, which will be shared broad reaching. It will be shared with everyone who participated in the listening session to share with their network, as well as further out. So we're excited to see what comes out of these discussions. The first one was just really, really good energy. So hopefully next week we'll learn even more. The second project is our internal public engagement plan, which Shalana De Silva will be assisting us with. This is going to be sort of an internal interview and surveying process, sitting down with each individual division and asking a series of questions. So Shalana currently is working on a rubric of questions that are getting at share your greatest success with community engagement and why it went well, share maybe what's something that consistently we could do better, as well as maybe how we can expand our inclusion within our engagement, and what are some regulatory engagement elements of your project that we need to be meeting those different features of an engagement project. And so this way, the ultimate goal is to create some sort of a roadmap that's identifying regulatory needs, that's identifying where we could do better, and also identifying each division's role in engagement. So government affairs is who you want to turn to when you want to bring an elected official to the meeting or connect with an elected official staff. And we want to be coordinated on that. Same with public affairs, of course, has a formed role planning, design and construction. And so we'll be doing internal interviews of all divisions and coming up with how we can have a productive and engagement guide for the Park District, which could then help us to expand our community engagement by sharing the load. And then lastly, our local community information guides. And this is a GIS project being conducted by some environmental policy and management master's student team. We hope to have all of these different project teams come to future legislative committee meetings to have discussions with you and really focus in on each of these projects individually. But for the local community information guides, that 2019 survey that received over 8,000 responses, the responses were mappable. And that was something that we went into that survey project really committed to. We wanted it to be mappable for the reasons that was pointing out, Director Rosario was pointing out earlier, in terms of seeing where there's sort of low points, high points, and understand the different needs of the different communities. What are the common interests? What are the common barriers? And so the student team will be mapping out the GIS data from the survey. They'll also be mapping out the census data to understand what languages are spoken in each area, what are the economic barriers, what are the different makeups of the community. And so they'll be making 6 different local community information guides. The 6 different geographic zones will be our interpretation and recreation zones. So we have 6 interp zones. They'll be making 6 guides that align with those interp zones. That way we're building off of an existing sort of breakout of the region. And something that will be beneficial about these guides is it's sometimes taking in a full 2-county district in one look is a lot. And so we'll be able to have these more localized understandings of the wants, the needs, and who the community are to speak with elected officials, to pair with our grant applications for additional funding, and to just simply understand who is in our communities, what are they interested in, and how can we best support them and connect with them. So with that, all 3 projects are aligned to conclude in June of 2021. So they're spanning this first 6 months of 2021. And as Eric shared, we are hoping to work with Dr. Ana Alvarez and Catherine Dunley on their second phase of their DEI project, which will be external facing. That phase is to begin in around mid-year of 2021. So we really want to align our broad engagement project to match so that they can build off of this work even further. And so each project has its own deliverable. The facilitated community discussions will end with a report from the UC Davis, which will it'll map out our engagement structures and what they learned from the survey, as well as all of the survey crosstabs. The public engagement plan will be a plan as the deliverable to help guide future engagement and understanding of how divisions can work together. And then the local community information guides will be both a PDF with all of the information as well as an interactive online map platform. So staff can really drill into what various communities are sharing with us, what's going on out there, and who they are. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Eric in case here are some dates of, well, today's February 9th, it's before legislative committee. We hope to bring it before the full board, possibly at a workshop or a future date, the Park Advisory Committee, the Multicultural Advisory Committee, and the Regional Parks Foundation to get additional insight and thoughts on all of these different projects. And with that, I'll pass it back to Eric for concluding thoughts.
So it's a lot of information, and we've had a long meeting, so I won't, it won't belabor the point. I think it's very, from a government affairs standpoint and from the general manager standpoint, this is aimed at, us being able to better communicate with our electeds and with decision makers, policy makers, and the public. However, having said that, I really compliment Lisa in taking the broader approach for the benefit of the district, that this is a much more holistic project than simply government affairs. And so we're bringing it to you now, but it's part of a district-wide effort to understand the community better and to work better with provide the services that we provide in a way that meets the community where they want to be met. So with that, I see Anne has her hand up, so I'll stop talking.
I'm interested in the demographics do not seem to include the rather large Asian communities. And I've noticed certainly that recently some negative things have been happening in the Chinese community. Ben Yi even talked about in Fremont, this issue coming directly at him. But of course, Ben was very, said, I was born in San Francisco, why are you giving me a bad time? But so there's a very large community in Fremont, and there's an expanding one, I think, in Dublin. So I think we want to make sure that those demographics are built into this too, because it's a very important, and some of them are quite active in different ways. So I don't know whether you've talked about, and Mona's been so good about bringing everybody there. So maybe Mona's the best person to help pull those sections in. But I think it's very worthwhile. A lot of work went into this. Congratulations, Lisa.
Thank you.
There'll be a lot to read.
It will be. A lot to share, and hopefully a lot of good information to for folks all across the district. And to your point, absolutely, we're working. Mona Ko is fantastic. I can't sing her praises enough. And we are working to invite folks from Fremont and of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to the listening sessions to share their experiences and perspectives on the parks and communities.
And Dee, I'm not going to forget the Filipino community, because I know they exist throughout the district too.
Yes, they're out there.
Yes, they are. They're everywhere. Okay, well, my gosh, what a session, guys.
Yeah, I just want to
What
say
a lot of work to be done.
if I may, I just want to say I think this is incredibly timely and very. I congratulate both Lisa and Eric on their innovation and their forward thinking, because we're going to need all of this for everything from our, because we're getting ready to do our master plan, and we got to bring in. This will be very extremely helpful for the new general manager. And this will be helpful in our future finances, looking for financial security. So this is incredibly timely, and I just can't thank you both enough for this work and thinking ahead. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the results. I'm looking forward to the first two sessions, the next two sessions.
Okay.
And thank you, Dee, and other board members. Thanks for the support and enabling us to do this work and have Lisa on the team. And
Well, frankly, it's so helpful to all of us, the board. I'm sure everybody will be pleased to see it all, Okay, Carol, do you have anything to add?
Well, I just want to thank Eric and Lisa for bringing this forward. It really is, as Dee said, just right on time to the minute, engaging in this work, and it will serve us internally and externally very well in the future. And then just in my role as interim general manager, just the enthusiasm with which Lisa presented this project, you can tell that her heart is in it and she's enjoying it and excited about it. And that's always nice to see. So thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. Oh no, she was bored to death, I can tell. Okay, anything further? Anyone? If not, do you think we spent enough time on this? I think we have, but it's been well worthwhile. The sun is shining in Livermore.
It's still gray in Oakland.
Hey, I think a walk is in my future. I don't know about the rest of you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all so much. And with that, we will be adjourned.
Great.
I just wanted to add, just to clarify, we had no public comment today.
Oh, I am sorry. Thank you, Yuli.
I would let you know if we did, but I just want to clarify so folks know.
Well, thanks for clarification. And we know they're out there walking in a park. If you were in Livermore, you could walk behind the house and the almonds are blooming. So if you feel like coming out here, it's really terrific right about now. Okay, anybody have anything else? Yuli says no. Okay, with that, please go do something worthwhile. Dennis, the golf course, who knows?
Maybe.
Maybe, okay, bye-bye.